All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Dan Whedon, and this is Unleashed the Podcast. We are back live streaming, the first live stream we've had in 2021. And I've got some really good friends that I'm interviewing today. You're not going to want to miss it. Before I introduce you to Karen and Rob, a reminder that Unleashed the Podcast is ubiquitous. Wherever you like to get your podcasts, I know you can find us. That's Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, and now Pandora Podcasts. I bet you didn't know Pandora had podcasts. They do. So you should go on there, listen to me, give me a five. We always love to get those fives for ratings. You can also visit unleashedthepodcast.com to become a patron member. I have two patron member bonus episodes in January. One is up already. It's with David Langfit and Gar Lang. We're talking about patron of the arts stuff. It's really great. And then next week, Darren LaCroix, my interview with the 2001 world champion of public speaking, is going to be out. So become a podcast or a patron member of the podcast. You'll not be sorry that you did. You'll also not be sorry that you're listening to the rest of this episode, because I have Karen McNamara and Rob McNamara, mother and son, who have created a consulting company called Click Consultants. We're going to talk about what they do and their leadership and communications advice around multi-generational businesses. You could be a family business that have different generations, or you could just have a lot of different generations in your business. Whatever it is, Karen and Rob are here to help. So first of all, Karen, Rob, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm glad to have you. We are old. I shouldn't say old. I guess it's a generational
I
thing.
am.
Well, we are old Toastmaster pals. We go way back in the Toastmasters world, and so I'm really excited to have you.
We're excited to be here. Thank you so much.
So let's talk about this. And when I send out a question, it can be to either whoever wants to answer first. Shoot it out there. I'm curious about how it is or what it is that you both do in helping businesses deal with multiple generations in the workplace. Because if my information's correct, I think there's as many as 5 generations in the workplace today. Am I correct on that?
You are. You are correct. First time ever that we've got 5 generations working side by side, volunteering side by side, and sometimes even living under the same roof.
So how do you guys work with businesses to help them deal with some of the challenges? And maybe I'd ask at the same time, share what some of the challenges you've seen.
Yeah, so we start with workshops. We will kind of figure out what are the dynamic problems you're having, kind of working with these different generations, and then we work together to come up with solutions. And I think one of the advantages that we bring to the table is that we have 2 generations helping out in that discussion right away. And me being a millennial, Karen being a boomer, we just have this great kind of disparity in how we approach things, but also we also find those links and how we can kind of come together. And so we share strategies depending on which way you're trying to work the generational ladder to really find opportunities to work together, but also really appreciate the differences within each other.
And so I'm just going to, what are some of the challenges, Karen, maybe I'll ask, what are some of the challenges that you see in businesses around generations in the workplace?
I think the biggest thing that we see is that the different generations don't understand each other. They don't understand the perspective of the way they look at the world. And because of that, they come in with attitudes or assumptions that are really not correct. You often hear in the workplace, oh, those millennials, it's all about them. They don't care They don't care about the workplace. They just want it about them. And I'll actually let Rob speak to that. That's not really the perspective. And the reason is because what happened around them as they grew up. Our formative ages are between 8 and 18. And the seminal events that take place around you during that time frame are what help form the way you look at the world. So we have 3 generations, I believe, represented here. I think you're probably, Dan, when were you born?
So funny. I guess you could call me a Generation X. However, I was born about 13 hours left in the baby boomer, December 31, 1964. So I'm officially a boomer. Although I'm sure I'm probably more considered a Generation X. But yeah, I'd say we're probably looking at 3 different generations here, right?
Yeah, so
Definitely.
each one of us have different memories about what took place, and we look at the world very differently. And that's probably the first place we start with businesses, is helping them understand the perspectives of the different generations. And then we deep dive from there.
So I want to explore something with both of you, because something Karen said brought to mind a conversation I had with a fellow consultant many years ago who is also an expert in generations. Her comment was this: what happened around the time you were 10 years old, give or take, but she used 10 as a basis, um, forms you with other generations that may have had something similar. I didn't explain it. So here's an example. She said someone who was born in 1931 and someone who was born in 1991 share a certain level of kinship or ideology, in a sense that the people born in 1931 experienced Pearl Harbor and the entry into World War II. And those born in 1991, very close to like one of my daughters, experienced September 11th at about 10 years old. And those events and how they impacted the country moving forward, and how they had this kind of kinship, for lack of a better word. And now I'm wondering, here we are, what happened in 2020. I wonder if people who are 10 years old, who were born in 2010, may have a similar type of a feel. Can we explore that a little bit? Talk about that.
Yeah, I would definitely say that the events that you, how they have impacted you, definitely have a shift and impact on your life. And um, we don't always know. I couldn't tell you or predict kind of what does the pandemic result in, but
Right.
we definitely see impacts based on a lot of those events. And I think you bring up a really good point on kind of the US versus the international element of this. It's been very interesting as we've talked and learned about the generations, that a lot of like the data that you see is very US centric, but the same kind of thing occurred. Like if I was in Japan and I had a very different event occur, then that caused that event. Now, the interesting thing now is we have this whole new pandemic that is a worldwide event,
Right.
and is that going to impact this generation and maybe even more align them or not? And I think what's yet to be seen, just because that generation is so young, but in the next kind of 5-10 years, we will start to really see what was that impact. And I mean, there are definitely immediate impacts, but I don't know that they're generational impacts. Whereas I think in 10 years, you will see a generational impact on that group, because they're having to learn some things very differently.
Talk to me. Thank you for that. Talk to me a little bit about technology too, because again, as we talk here, something that's spurred in my head. I know that my dad was 40 years older than me when I was born. So he served in World War II. He went through the Depression, served in World War II. And here I was growing up in the 70s with rock and roll and long hair and the whole thing.
I want to see
But
that.
the technology difference wasn't that huge. I mean, there was some innovations, but it wasn't that huge from the time he was a kid. The technology is advancing so rapidly, and I look at, heard about Rob and millennials, but the next generation is even using it more. What are some of the challenges that need to be overcome by current and future business owners as younger people enter the workforce?
So I can talk a little bit to that in the terms of mentorship. I think is probably one of the biggest things that we have lost. So in the kind of shift of the pandemic, many of the industries and businesses are forced to go to an at-home situation, and or they just are not going into the office. And so we are seeing a huge gap in how can we take that generation that just came out of college or high school and is going into the workforce, and how do we teach them? Because I'm not sitting next to them, or I'm not showing them side by side. And so I know one of the solutions that we've used kind of in the architectural industry is we will set up a Zoom session like this, or we'll set up a Teams meeting, and we will open it up, and we'll just be sitting there next to each other. We're not even working on the same thing, not even having dialogue necessarily about the work that we're doing. It's just to have conversation or say, hey, can you help me with this detail? I don't understand. But to kind of create that side by side feel, even though we aren't side by side. And so I personally, how do you take that next generation of, I'm going to use architects because that's where I'm in, is just how do you take that next set of architects who are coming fresh out of school and teach them what I've now learned over 15 years of being in architecture? How do I evolve that person in a virtual world? And there are tons of strategies around that, but that is definitely one of them that we are using and has been extremely successful for us. And generationally, it works because there's a nice socialization, and we both are very comfortable with technology. So it is a little awkward, I think, for that older generation to kind of work into that, because it's not how they worked every day for the last 50 years.
So I'm going to call out your mom now. So
Yeah.
Karen, I want to talk to you. We're closer in age, I believe, and so I would consider us comparable in that. If you were like me, you know, when you were a kid, you thought, oh, our parents don't have any idea. And now, as we've grown up and raised kids and getting into grandkids and all of that, I've seen many people who are baby boomers and Generation Xers who are business owners saying, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to go into tech. I don't like this. I don't like Zoom. I don't like this. Can't we do it the old way? And it seems some of them was somewhat cantankerous. They've forgotten about what it was like when they were younger. How can you help, or how can anybody who is listening or watching develop and be able to kind of set aside how it was when they were young to be able to embrace technology and new innovative thinking from some of their younger employees?
Well, I think we have to realize that technology is here and it's here to stay. It's not going away anytime in the future.
Not only that, is expanding, right?
Exactly. It began kind of with Generation X is when it first started with the Xbox and the technology. And you see, like with your generation, there was, you know, that latchkey kid because both parents were working and you're at home and trying to figure it out. And all of a sudden you're realizing this work-life balance is all messed up. So you start challenging the boss and saying, hey, I want to work these different hours. And the boss is me as a boomer saying, what? Who are you to say what you want? I'm the boss.
Right.
But we have to stop and relook and reframe the way we look at things, keeping technology in mind. You see a lot of entrepreneurs in Generation X because they realize I don't need a boss.
Right.
I don't need these people. I can do it myself. So we have to keep that in mind. And you pointed out that the veterans, mature World War II generation and the newer generations have a common bond.
Yeah.
And that's because they came through very similar kinds of things in the world. Depression, war, pandemic, flu epidemic.
Right.
And when you put someone that's 100 years old and someone that's 20 together and they talk, they get each other. They understand. But the difference, as you mentioned, is technology. So we as business owners have to use technology to our advantage when we sell, when we market, when we talk, when we display things. Look how you're using podcasts. Look how we're exploring technology. We can share that way, reach our audience that way, reach our clients that way. So using technology is something we as boomers have to just get over and figure out how we can relate. And when you can bond and mentor together, then you can make teams that are amazing.
So I think what's interesting is a couple things that you said. I think business owners get that about acquiring business and growing business, but I think sometimes there's a gap in how they have relationships and communicate with their own employees. Before I dive into family business, maybe talk a little bit about that. I know that the way I communicate now involves multiple ways: text, might even be Facebook Messenger, however, that person wants to be heard. Now, if they're clients or prospective clients, we seem to do that well as business owners. But when it's somebody that you're working with, sometimes you don't go to their level. Rob, how important is it for millennials and younger to have the person they're working for, their managers or their leaders, communicate and relate with them in a way that works for you?
Yeah, I definitely think it's critical. And, often one of the best things you can do as that manager is ask which preferred method do they want.
Mm-hmm.
It's been interesting because what I would have told you even a year ago is different than I would tell you today.
Mm.
And a lot of that has to do with that because I'm on a virtual environment on my computer in front of me, but then I'm also like often trying to multitask or text or, do something else. And so, that platform changes depending on what we're doing. And I think that's one of the kind of the evolutions that's occurred. And so I think it's absolutely critical to ask that question and understand where do you want that communication. And even my mom and I, we've had kind of back and forth and I think even this last year we struggled because I had my method switched and I never communicated that and she didn't know that. So
So
for example,
there's two ways of this. So it's not just, it's both sides being able to make sure that they're working that way, right?
it is, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's less likely that I would ask. I would just expect you to pick the right platform. So you're better off asking. It's just, and it's partly because, I'll just use the example of, I mean, I use text during my other meetings during a day now, but that's because I'm sitting on Teams all day. And so my work environment has forced me to switch what my platform was, whereas I would have said, I'd rather just to email me and I'll get
Right.
back to you in sequence. And that completely changed in that environment of everybody being at home versus just in an office or something like that.
So I want to turn up. Oh, Karen, go ahead.
I was just going to say that since he didn't communicate that with me, I became very frustrated because the way we had talked about connecting wasn't working. We finally had to have that direct conversation to say, you know what, this is not working well. We need to re-look at how we're connecting and how we're communicating. We're across the country from each other. We have a business. We're trying to reach out. Let's make this work. And we did. We talked it through and we got on the same page.
Well, that's a great segue to what I was going to bring up. Let's turn up the heat and turn these dynamics of employer and employee into a family business. I'm going to say, most of my clients have some level of family business because I work with small and medium sized businesses. So many times the CEO or the president is one of the parents or both of the parents, and you have their children who are in most cases adult working their way up, and there's a lot of different dynamics. And it's one thing to be an employer and employee, it's another to add father, mother, brother, sister, child to that equation. And sometimes kind of the rules of engagement, they go out the window, right? They go out the window. Can you both just share a little bit about you two, or it's just you two, but I'm thinking about others, people that you work with, companies that you work with that have these family dynamic. What are some strategies, techniques, ideas that you have to help them communicate better along those generational lines?
Sure. So I guess I can start out. I think one of the things is don't be afraid to blend them. Business and family can have to be in the same conversation. I enjoy the fact that, our conversations are, they're linked. We're still living life, but we're also doing business, and we don't try and pretend to separate them. They're linked. And it's because it's part of who we are and what's going on. And if you're having a bad day and you're not willing to talk about it because I'm in business mode, that's a problem.
Hmm.
So being able to kind of cross those, have those cross discussions, I think is really valuable. I also, in family businesses, I think it's important that when you have other perceptions of other employees around you, that the family isn't giving, that family member is not necessarily always given special provisions. I think making them earn it, and sometimes the family members, at least in my opinion, when it's done well, is they almost have to earn it more.
Hmm.
Because it shows that value to all those others who are working around, and it's just not inherited. And so I think there's an opportunity there within that family business to still be a business and have those components, but also it is, you're still family. Enjoy that. It's a cool aspect of a business that we get to have and we're blessed to have.
Karen?
And by the same token, like all families, you have different opinions, different generational opinions, and different opinions in general. And so you have to have those crucial conversations
Yeah.
sometimes. And you have to get down and say, this is what's happening. You want to take emotion out of it. Don't have the conversation when you're upset, because then you're not thinking clearly. You trigger your adrenaline and it drains from your brain and you say stupid stuff. It just happened. So don't go there. Wait, calm, take a deep breath, talk about family, the grandbaby, things like that for a while, calm down, and then say, you know what, this is what I'm seeing happen. I'm seeing the communication in this way, and my expectation was this was the way it was going to be. What am I missing?
So help me with this, because I agree with you. It's logical, but we also know that there's emotions when it comes to family dynamics, and you would often see those same personalities transferred from personal to business, and that interchange can be hard, especially if there's at the dinner table people who may not be part of the business, right? They may not be, so what are some skills that you teach to say, okay, let's back the emotion up? Because that's, as we've seen in the political world in the last year, so that's hard to do, is to back that those emotions out of there. It's hard to, what are some things that you would recommend to somebody listening saying, I get it, but it's hard for me, or it's hard for somebody else to change that? What would you do?
I would say step back and look at what is it you want out of the conversation? What is the outcome you want?
Okay.
Is it to win? I'm right, you're wrong.
Right.
Or is it to have a stronger relationship? Or is it to do so? Step out of it. Often it's our motive shifts from what we want to being right when we're caught up in emotion. So step back and say, okay, what is it I'm really looking for? And then say that. This is what I want in this relationship or where we're heading. Let's talk about how we can get there. And then wait. Let the other person talk. That's hard sometimes, especially
Yeah.
when you're emotional and you're frustrated, or I get frustrated. And what do? You think back to a previous time when you were frustrated, and it builds your emotions even more. I think back to when Robbie stayed out all night on prom night and thought that it was okay and that mom wouldn't worry.
And you
That
can't
was
bring that, up though. I mean, wouldn't that be against kind of the rules of engagement? You can't bring up something that somebody did personally and use that against them in business, or vice versa. Am I right on that?
Exactly. But what happens is your mind thinks that.
Right.
You
Right.
go there. That's why you have to stop, take a deep breath, and say, wait a minute, what am I trying to accomplish here? What is my goal? Because we can change us. We can't change the other person.
Yeah.
And so if we change the way we approach it and make it feel safe That's key, is making it feel safe for the other person to talk. You really should be able to talk about just about anything if the person feels safe and not threatened. If I bring up past stuff, immediately I now have triggered their emotion.
Yeah.
That's what you want to avoid.
I would also say that that humility that Karen kind of demonstrated in that story doesn't mean you're losing. And I think we often take to that we have to win this argument. And so taking a step of humility actually will give you more information to solve it the way and guide it to the outcome you want. And you want becomes we want because you start to hear the other half.
So what you're saying, Robbie, is it's not a zero-sum game. This is yeah. This is about compromise. It's about collegiality, and it's about what's best for the company, right?
Yeah, and compromise is a dangerous word too. I think I would say, you know, is it truly finding a win-win? And
Mm.
usually there is a win-win. There are very rare occasions I think where you do have to kind of take that step of compromise. But if you really work your way through and navigate that conversation, that really crucial conversation, you'll find that you can get to a win-win in almost every case. And that is probably one of the things that you know, as we start to take that humility and take that step back and pause and let others speak, we find that win-win. And most people are smart enough to find and navigate to that point. And it's a great opportunity within having that conversation. And you'll be better for it. And, you know, that quote win is everyone moving forward and
Yep.
everybody's better for it.
So,
In
go ahead.
addition to humility, I would say be curious.
Hmm.
Be curious as to what the other person is thinking or feeling and what is their perspective.
Yep. Well, I know I'm going to have you guys back on at some point. We're going to have more conversations about this. We're out of time, so I want you to tell everybody who might now be very interested in learning more about what you both do. How do they contact you if they want to reach?
You can use all methods of communication.
All methods.
We have Facebook under click-consultants.com. And we also have a website, www.click-consultants.com. Or you can call us, and probably the easiest way to find our numbers is on our website, but also I'll give you Karen's because why not? It's 360-265-8017, and I'm actually 8018. So you can call us or text us or any one of those. We would love to reach out and have a conversation. Or, and if you can't find us for some reason, reach out to Dan. He knows how to
Yeah.
get a hold of us
And
as
I'll
well.
make sure that I have those linked as well. So to both of you, Karen, Rob, thank you very much. I really appreciate you joining me today. We're going to talk more in the future about this multi-generational thing, and because it's going to keep on growing. To all of you out there, thank you for joining. Again, you can find Unleash the podcast where you get all your podcasts. Please subscribe, please rate us. Think about becoming a patron. For right now, please be safe, be healthy, and above all, be unleashed.